You are 7 years old and burning up with fever, the sheets damp against your skin, and your mother has her hand on your forehead with the kind of expression that tells you something is wrong even before you understand what it means. Then you hear the knock at the front door, your father's voice saying, "Come in," and heavy footsteps on the stairs. A man in a dark suit walks into your bedroom carrying a black leather bag that he sets on the edge of your bed. He opens the brass clasp and sits down beside you. The first thing he does is put his hand on your forehead, the same hand that delivered you, that set your father's wrist 2 winters ago, that your mother calls when anything goes wrong with anyone in the house. He already knows your name. He knows what your father does for a living and that your mother is expecting again. He is your doctor, and he came to your house because that is what doctors did. If you remember that knock on the door and that black leather bag, hit subscribe, because the people who remember this are leaving us, and this story deserves to be told before it disappears entirely. Think about what that actually was. A man with a medical degree drove to your home at 9 o'clock on a weeknight in the rain because your child had a fever. He did not suggest you call back during office hours. He did not direct you to an emergency room 40 minutes away. He came to you, sat on your bed, and stayed until he was satisfied that you were going to be all right. He charged your family $3 for the visit, maybe $5. In some cases, he charged nothing at all, because he knew your father had been laid off from the plant, and there was no sense adding to the trouble. Maybe your mother left a pie on his porch that weekend because that was how people settled accounts in a small town. In rural areas, doctors were regularly paid in eggs, in chickens, in firewood, in whatever the family had available. One doctor in Tucson in the 1950s was once paid with a complete set of Edward Gibbon's The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, all 6 volumes, because that was what the patient had to offer, and both men considered it a fair exchange. Nobody filled out a form. Nobody called an insurance company to wait on hold for 45 minutes before receiving a referral to see someone in 3 weeks who had never heard their name. The doctor knew your name and your parents' names, and usually the names of the people next door. That was the entire foundation of the arrangement. In the 1930s, 40% of all doctor-patient encounters in America took place inside somebody's home. A kitchen, a bedroom, a front porch. By 1950, that had dropped to 10%. By the early 1970s, it was down to 5%. By 1980, it had fallen below 1%, which meant the family doctor who knew 3 generations of your family, who had delivered the grandmother and the mother and the grandchild, had effectively vanished in the space of about 40 years. The bag he carried was a Gladstone bag, dark leather with brass fittings and a steel frame at the bottom. It opened from the top and stayed open by design, because in an emergency, you needed to reach inside quickly and find what you were looking for without fumbling with a latch. Inside was a stethoscope, a blood pressure cuff, a glass thermometer in a Bakelite case, which used mercury and took a full 5 minutes to register a reading. There were tongue depressors, an otoscope for checking ears, a small hammer for testing reflexes, and glass syringes with metal needles. The doctors sterilized those needles between patients using methylated spirits and boiling water. The first disposable plastic syringe was not manufactured until 1955, which means that every injection you received before then came from a needle that had already been used on someone else, in another house, earlier that same day. Some doctors carried enough in that bag to set a broken arm. Others packed surgical instruments, tourniquets, even amputation tools, because in the rural parts of the country, the nearest hospital could be 2 hours away, and there was no guarantee the patient would survive the trip. Before the telephone, someone had to physically run to the doctor's house or send a telegram. There were cases where the only option was to wait and hope he arrived in time. Everything a physician could do for you in 1940 fit inside that leather bag. That was the entire scope of what medicine could offer, and the man who carried it brought it directly to your door. In 1948, Life magazine sent a photographer named W. Eugene Smith to a small town called Kremling in the Colorado Rockies. The town had a population of roughly 600 people and a single physician, Dr. Ernest Terriani, who was responsible for 400 square miles of mountain territory, with no other doctor anywhere nearby. Smith followed him for 23 days and photographed everything, including Seriani delivering babies, setting broken bones, treating a 2-year-old girl who had been kicked in the head by a horse, and performing a cesarean section in the middle of the night in which both the mother and the baby were lost. The most reproduced photograph from the series shows Seriani sitting in the hospital kitchen at 2 a.m. with a cup of coffee and a cigarette, staring at the wall, visibly hollowed out, having just lost them both with nothing he could have done differently. 20 million Americans saw that image. The essay was titled Country Doctor and is still regarded as one of the first great photo essays in the history of journalism. The reason it resonated the way it did was not that people found Dr. Cariani remarkable, but that they recognized him. He looked like their doctor. He was their doctor, in a different town with a different name. Norman Rockwell understood the same thing. He painted that doctor repeatedly for the Saturday Evening Post across 3 decades. In 1929, a painting called Doctor and Doll showed an elderly physician listening to a little girl's doll through his stethoscope with an expression of total seriousness, as though the doll's heartbeat mattered as much as any living patient's. In 1947, Rockwell painted his own family doctor, George Russell from Arlington, Vermont, and the caption in the Post said Russell had heard a quarter-century of troubles in that room. In 1958, Before the shot showed a boy with his trousers halfway down, standing on a chair in the doctor's office, studying the diploma on the wall to determine whether this man was actually qualified to stick a needle in him. Those paintings were reproduced millions of times. Not because they were considered fine art, but because people looked at them and said, "That is exactly my doctor." By 1969, the house call doctor was already fading from everyday life, which is precisely when television decided to give him a proper farewell. The show Marcus Welby, M.D. starred Robert Young, the same actor who had played America's model father on Father Knows Best, now cast as America's model physician. Welby was a general practitioner in Santa Monica who ran his practice from his own home, made house calls as a matter of routine, sat with patients through the night, knew their families by name, and drove them home from the hospital personally. The show became the #1 program in the country during its second season, the first ABC series to ever reach the top spot, and was watched in roughly 1 in 4 American households on Tuesday nights. Real physicians were not pleased. Their patients had begun telling them that they were not as kind or attentive as Dr. Welby, and the doctors had no effective response because they understood that what Welby represented on screen was something they had already quietly stopped doing in practice. The show ran until 1976, and by the time it ended, the thing it had been mourning was thoroughly gone. What ended it was not a single event, but a series of pressures that all moved in the same direction over the same period of time. The first was technology. X-ray machines do not fit in a Gladstone bag. Nor does an MRI, nor a laboratory, nor a CT scanner. The instruments that could save your life grew too large and too complex to carry up a staircase, and the diagnosis that once depended on a doctor's hands and ears increasingly required equipment that could only exist in a fixed location. In the 1920s, 3 out of 4 American physicians were general practitioners, the kind of doctor who handled everything from delivering babies to setting bones, from treating pneumonia to diagnosing heart conditions. By the 1980s, fewer than 1 in 100 still practiced general medicine. The rest had become specialists, each an expert in a single area of the body and largely unable to manage the unpredictable range of problems a house call might present. The third was economics. A doctor making house calls could see 5 or 6 patients in a full day. The same doctor working from an office could see 25. The arithmetic was straightforward, and once insurance companies positioned themselves between the physician and the patient, particularly after Medicare was introduced in 1965, the billing structure made house calls functionally impossible. There was no reimbursement for travel time. There was no billing code for sitting beside someone's bed until their fever broke. Dr. Preston Taylor, who practiced in Tucson through the 1950s and the 1960s and routinely dressed over his pajamas for middle-of-the-night calls, summarized it in one sentence. He said that when you paid the doctor, you called the shots, and now the insurance companies do. He also said that doctors in those years were happier than they are today, that they had more freedom and more latitude and more room to simply be one human being taking care of another. Your family doctor in 1955 charged $3 for an office visit and $5 to come to your house at midnight. Today, a 30-minute appointment costs around $150. You wait 3 weeks to get in. You sit in a waiting room for an hour. The doctor sees you for 12 minutes while typing into a laptop and does not know your wife's name, does not know your son just had a baby, and has never once set foot in your home. 1/3 of all primary care physicians in the United States no longer accept new Medicare patients because government reimbursement does not cover their operating costs. Dr. Earl Virts practiced in the Virginia Piedmont in the late 1950s and early 1960s. He delivered 450 babies in 7.5 years. He charged $5 for a house call and collected roughly 80% of what he billed. The other 20%, the families who simply could not pay, he treated anyway, because every doctor did, and nobody considered it unusual. He weighed 165 pounds when he started his practice and 130 when he left it, completely burnt out in 8 years. That kind of medicine used everything a person had to give. Somewhere there is a kitchen where a doctor once sat at the table and told your mother that the fever would break by morning, and it did, because he had seen it 100 times in 100 other kitchens, and he knew what he was looking at. Somewhere there is a woman who remembers being 6 years old and watching a man in a dark suit open a leather bag that smelled like rubbing alcohol and something else she was never quite able to identify. He placed a cold stethoscope against her chest and told her to take a deep breath for him, and she did, and she was not afraid, because her mother was standing right there and the doctor was someone her mother trusted without reservation. That doctor did not have an MRI or a computer. He had his hands and his ears and his bag and 30 years of knowing your family. And when your mother called at 2 a.m, he answered the phone, got dressed, picked up that bag, and drove to your house. If this brought something back, leave a like to help more people find the video. Subscribe for more videos like this, and if you want, leave a comment. Who was your family doctor, or what do you remember about the night he came to your house? You probably didn't know it was the last time a doctor would ever walk through your front door. Nobody announced it. The house calls just stopped one by one, until the knock at the door that your parents had always counted on simply wasn't there anymore.